For more than 20 years, Napoleon Bonaparte dominated the battlefields of Europe. But on one rainy day, in a muddy field near a small Belgian village called Waterloo, everything he had built came crashing down. This happened because of a series of mistakes, small, almost invisible at first, that grew and grew until even the greatest commander of his time could not save himself. June 18th, 1815, was the day when the future of Europe balanced on a knife's edge and fell. But what happened that day? How did a man who had never lost when it mattered most suddenly lose everything? And what if Napoleon had triumphed at Waterloo instead of falling? The true story of Waterloo is far more intense, more brutal, and more surprising than the simple tales you might have heard. Once you know it, you might never look at history the same way again. To truly understand why the Battle of Waterloo became one of the most important turning points in European history, we need to take a few steps back and look at how everything led to that fateful moment. After years of almost non-stop warfare across the continent, and especially after his disastrous invasion of Russia, where his grand army was destroyed by cold, hunger, and exhaustion, Napoleon Bonaparte found himself forced to surrender in 1814. Europe's rulers, tired of the endless bloodshed, finally pushed him off the stage, exiling him to a small island called Elba, off the coast of Italy, while trying to rebuild a fragile peace without him. But Napoleon was never the kind of man who accepted defeat easily. Less than a year into his exile, in February 1815, he staged a daring escape. He slipped away from Elba, landed in southern France with just a few hundred loyal soldiers, and as he marched north toward Paris, more and more men rallied to his side. Within a matter of weeks, without even firing a major shot, Napoleon had taken back control of France, sending the newly restored King Louis XVII fleeing into exile once again. The kings and emperors of Europe were horrified. They had worked so hard to remove Napoleon, and now he was back, stronger than ever. They immediately came together once more, forming a powerful alliance known as the Seventh Coalition, which included Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia. Their goal was simple: defeat Napoleon once and for all before he could rebuild his empire and threaten the peace of Europe again. Knowing that time was not on his side, Napoleon decided to strike first. He believed that if he could defeat the British forces under the Duke of Wellington and the Prussian army led by Field Marshal Blücher before they could fully unite, he might have a real chance of securing his throne permanently. So, he gathered a strong army, called the Armée du Nord, and marched swiftly into what is now Belgium, hoping to break the coalition forces apart while they were still spread out and unorganized. The scene was set for one of history's greatest confrontations: Napoleon Bonaparte against Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, and Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher, three legendary commanders, each leading thousands of men, prepared for one final and decisive battle that would change the course of Europe forever. Now, let us step onto the battlefield and see how the Battle of Waterloo unfolded from the very first cannon shot to the final desperate charge. At 3:30 a.m. on June 18th, 1815, in the cold, damp pre-dawn darkness, a crucial message finally reaches the headquarters of the Duke of Wellington, carrying the confirmation that Blücher and the Prussian army are marching toward Waterloo, offering the promise of vital support that Wellington has been desperately hoping for throughout the long and uncertain night. By 6 a.m., as the pale light of dawn begins to break over the muddy fields of Belgium, Wellington's Allied army strengthens its defensive positions along the low ridge north of the important chateau of Hougoumont, while far to the south, Napoleon's French forces spread out across the rolling terrain near the inn of La Belle Alliance, which he has chosen as his central command point for the coming battle. At 7 a.m., Napoleon, confident yet cautious, starts his day with breakfast at his command post located in La Caillou, just south of the battlefield, as a heavy sense of anticipation and tension hangs thick in the air among his marshals and soldiers, who know that the coming hours could decide the fate of Europe. By 9 a.m., Wellington continues to improve his defenses, ordering critical adjustments to the troops guarding Hougoumont, understanding that this outpost could become a key to holding the Allied line, while at the same time, Napoleon sends his chief engineer forward to carefully inspect the Allied positions, and to the east, another reassuring message from Blücher arrives, confirming that Prussian forces are steadily advancing toward the battlefield. At 11 a.m., after several hours of observation and discussion with his commanders, Napoleon made his first major decision of the day, planning to launch his opening attack against the Allied right flank by striking the heavily fortified Hougoumont estate. At exactly 11:20 a.m., the calm of the morning is shattered as French artillery thunders across the fields, and the first shots of the Battle of Waterloo ring out, marking the beginning of a bloody and decisive struggle that will rage for the rest of the day. Between 11:20 a.m. and 12:20 p.m., the French infantry launched their first aggressive assault against Hougoumont, pushing the Allied defenders out of the surrounding woods and orchards. But despite the early French success, the determined Allied troops fought back with brutal counterattacks, refusing to give up the vital outpost without a fierce contest. From 12:20 p.m. to 1:15 p.m., the battle for Hougoumont grows even more savage, as wave after wave of French soldiers attempt to storm the stronghold, eventually managing to break through and enter the chateau itself, though they find themselves trapped in brutal hand-to-hand fighting within the burning buildings and courtyards. Between 1:15 p.m. and 2:15 p.m., the momentum of the battle begins to shift as Blücher's Prussian forces close in from the east, posing a serious threat to Napoleon's right flank. This situation forces the emperor to dispatch some of his valuable cavalry units away from the main battlefield in a desperate attempt to slow the Prussian advance. At around 1:30 p.m., in a bold move, Napoleon orders a major infantry attack on the center of Wellington's line, which initially succeeds in pushing the Allied troops back towards the farm of La Haye-Sainte. But Wellington's brigades quickly regroup and maneuver to surround the exposed French attackers, eventually forcing Napoleon's forces to retreat toward La Belle Alliance. From 2:15 p.m. to 3 p.m., the savage struggle for control of Hougoumont continues, now involving nearly 15,000 men locked in relentless combat. While elsewhere on the field, Napoleon sends in his heavy cavalry and lancers to counter the Allied cavalry, causing heavy casualties on both sides. And meanwhile, the Prussians keep pressing forward, slowly but steadily drawing closer to the main battlefield. Between 3 p.m. and 4 p.m., the fighting becomes even more chaotic as the buildings within Hougoumont are set on fire, filling the battlefield with smoke and flames, while Wellington orders fresh reinforcements to La Haye-Sainte, though the defenders there are running dangerously low on ammunition. At the same time, Napoleon reorganizes his forces and orders his Grand Battery to open devastating fire once again on the Allied lines. And to the east, violent clashes erupt between Prussian and French cavalry units. From 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., Wellington, carefully watching the situation unfold, orders his infantry to readjust their formations, which the French mistakenly interpret as a retreat, leading them to launch a massive cavalry charge directly at the Allied lines. But Wellington's seasoned troops quickly form defensive squares, holding firm against the furious French attacks, while brutal fighting continues around both La Haye-Sainte and Hougoumont. Between 6 p.m. and 6:30 p.m., after hours of terrible combat, the French finally succeed in capturing La Haye-Sainte, but at the same time, to Napoleon's horror, Prussian forces manage to seize the village of Plancenoit on the French right flank, forcing Napoleon to divert more troops away from his main assaults in a desperate attempt to retake the vital position. From 6:30 p.m. to 7 p.m., a fierce and bloody battle rages in Plancenoit, as French and Prussian troops launch attack after counterattack against each other, with Napoleon's forces eventually managing to recapture the village, though the victory comes at a terrible cost in manpower and precious time. Between 7 p.m. and 8:30 p.m., Wellington, after losing La Haye-Sainte, quickly strengthens his central line in preparation for the final French push, while to the east, the Prussians once again seize control of Plancenoit, further stretching Napoleon's already exhausted forces. In desperation, Napoleon orders his elite Imperial Guard to advance on Wellington's center, but their advance is shattered by devastating Allied artillery fire, and as the Imperial Guard falls back, panic begins to ripple through the French army. By 8:30 p.m., Wellington, sensing that the moment of victory is near, gives the signal for a full general advance of his battered but still determined forces, and he rides to the inn of La Belle Alliance, where he famously meets Field Marshal Blücher. symbolizing the unity of the Allied victory, while the shattered remnants of Napoleon's army break apart and begin to flee in total disorder. Between 9 p.m. and 10:30 p.m., the battlefield is filled with chaos as the retreating French forces are pursued relentlessly by the fresh Prussian troops, ensuring that Napoleon's defeat is total and irreversible, while Wellington's exhausted soldiers finally realize that they have secured one of the most important victories in European history. But how did it all go so wrong for a commander as brilliant as Napoleon? Despite being one of history's greatest military leaders, Napoleon made several critical mistakes at the Battle of Waterloo that together led to his downfall. His decisions on that fateful day, shaped by misjudgment, impatience, and misplaced confidence, turned what could have been a victory into the collapse of his empire. One of the most damaging choices was the delayed start of the battle. Napoleon waited until almost midday before launching his main attack, hoping that the sodden ground, soaked by the previous night's heavy rain, would dry enough for his cannons and cavalry to move effectively. While the caution made sense, the delay gave Wellington valuable time to strengthen his defensive positions and, more importantly, allowed Blücher's Prussian forces to march closer to the battlefield. Every lost hour made the French situation more dangerous, and by the time Napoleon fully committed his army, the Allies were more prepared than ever. Another major mistake was Napoleon's stubborn focus on capturing Hougoumont. While this farmhouse was important for anchoring Wellington's right flank, it was not crucial enough to justify the massive number of men and energy Napoleon poured into it. For most of the day, French forces battered Hougoumont without real success, draining troops that could have been better used to attack the true heart of the Allied position. This obsession with a secondary target weakened the French army's ability to deliver a powerful, decisive blow elsewhere on the field. Napoleon's attacks were poorly coordinated. Instead of striking Wellington's line with a massive, united force, the French attacks came in scattered waves. D'Erlin's infantry assault lacked enough support, and when cavalry charges later followed, they were launched without proper timing and without infantry to back them up. Although these cavalry assaults were dramatic and terrifying, they ultimately failed against the strong Allied infantry squares and cost the French valuable strength. Perhaps most fatally, Napoleon misjudged the Prussians. After their defeat at Ligny, he assumed they would not recover quickly enough to be a threat, and he trusted Marshal Grouchy to keep them away. However, Grouchy was too slow and ineffective, allowing Blücher's troops to arrive on the battlefield at a critical moment. Their appearance on Napoleon's right flank overwhelmed the French forces and tilted the battle heavily in the Allies' favor. Communication failures within the French army also hurt Napoleon's efforts. His marshals did not work together as smoothly as they had during earlier campaigns, and unclear or misunderstood orders led to confusion at key moments. By the time the Imperial Guard, Napoleon's most elite troops, was sent forward for one last desperate attack late in the day, the Allied center had already been reinforced. Their shocking defeat broke the spirit of the French army, causing panic and a full-scale collapse. In the end, the Battle of Waterloo became a lesson in how even a brilliant leader can fall when overconfidence, miscalculation, and poor timing come together. Each mistake alone may not have doomed Napoleon, but together, they destroyed any chance he had of winning the battle, and with it, his empire. But what if history had gone the other way? What would have happened if Napoleon won? If Napoleon had won at Waterloo, the entire history of Europe could have taken a completely different path. A French victory would have immediately crushed the hopes of the Bourbon monarchy to return to power, allowing Napoleon to fully re-establish himself as Emperor of France. Belgium, which was the center of the battle, would almost certainly have been absorbed into the French Empire, giving Napoleon a stronger foothold in Northern Europe and making France even more powerful on the continent. The defeat would have been a huge blow to Britain's pride and influence, likely forcing the British government to rethink its position. Although Britain had deep resources and a strong navy, the shock of losing at Waterloo could have led to an uneasy peace treaty with France, at least for a time, even though the rivalry between the two nations would probably have continued and maybe even led to more wars later on. Meanwhile, in Central and Eastern Europe, Prussia, already weakened after previous defeats, might have been pushed even further back, and Napoleon could have used his power to redraw the map of the German states again, to make them less of a threat. Austria, although not immediately attacked, would have watched Napoleon with growing fear, likely working quietly to form new alliances against him. One of the biggest long-term effects could have been the stronger spread of revolutionary ideas. Napoleon's system, including legal equality and the end of feudal privileges, might have taken deeper root in many European countries, speeding up social changes that took decades in real history. Also, with Britain possibly weakened in Europe, its control over global colonies might have faced more serious challenges, allowing France to grow stronger overseas. However, even if Napoleon had won, the strong spirit of nationalism and the fear among other powers of French domination suggest that peace would have been fragile, and Europe could have faced endless future conflicts under his shadow. If Napoleon had won at Waterloo, what do you think would have been the biggest change in today's world? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you learned something new today, give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves history, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.